If you're a relatively young individual who's into technology, you probably remember growing up with Apple being the ultimate or the pinnacle of what a consumer electronic brand could be. The iPod was something you treasured, the iMac was for the thinking man with heaps of cash to burn, and the eventual iPhone was like the ideal pocket computer. Somewhere along the way, that image changed, and what we have now is not necessarily a serious problem, but more of a leveling of the playing field. Something that has, for me, diminished what Apple as a brand always used to have. So today I want to talk about that. By the way guys, really trying to hit 150k before the end of the year, so if you wouldn't mind hitting that button, it really helped me out. Thank you very much. If there was one way you could describe Apple in the 2000s, maybe even the early to mid 2010s, it would be aura. There was a feeling about the company, like pride or like snobbery, depending on how you want to look at it. And people forget that many considered other smartphones like Samsung and LG models to be more like toys due to their plastic build and their compromised, usually overly bloated software. Add in market saturation and product dilution with the Korean brands building just so many phones, particularly mid-rangers, and this compounds those effects. Android smartphone build quality started improving in the mid-2010s and further cemented when reaching today's decade. And software improvement followed not long after with the likes of Samsung Experience and then the One UI transition, the introduction of Pixel Experience and of course the Android One program. Unfortunately, on the PC side, Windows really hasn't seen much in the way of development, such as what we have with Android, with Windows 11 still proving tricky for some users. Regardless, as Apple's competitors either dropped like flies, as with LG Mobile and HTC, or took a stronger stand with the likes of Samsung, OnePlus and Google, the once legendary and prestigious company has seemingly taken a few missteps that I believe majorly impacted the sentiment and feeling around it. It's perhaps most noticeable and relevant with the current smartphones we have, but it's something that's been going on for a long time. Apple's movement to larger phones with the iPhone 6 series certainly shook things up, selling more than any other smartphone and perhaps more than any other piece of technology at the time. There was of course Bendgate and touch disease, which seems to have no effect on sales but certainly caused many people many problems. The company's decision to go all in on the slimline MacBooks, hardly any usable ports or at least immediately usable ones, laptops with unconventional keyboards and interactive touch bars. This is something that plagued a whole generation of Apple laptops, and people still joke about it to this day. So bad in fact that the whole company backtracks completely with the generation's successor, one that reinstated popular and beloved connectivity options, ditched the gimmicky touchscreen and restored function keys, and made those keys worth typing on in the first place since it was a more traditional style key switch. But I think one of the most egregious and anti-Apple things that the company has done in many years is shoehorn a last-minute feature into the iPhone. Now, camera control might have not actually been a last-minute feature, but it certainly feels like it, and perhaps as a way to try and sell the new iPhone, because outside of that feature, this was incredibly similar, if not identical, to its predecessor. Not only is the feature completely redundant, given Apple built literally the gold standard of smartphone camera zoom controls with its button wheel combo thing, but its actual implementation is laughable given how awkward and clunky it is to use. It feels like something a company would slap onto a new model in order to just try and give you a reason to buy it. Thankfully you can turn it off in the settings, but that alone doesn't feel very Apple at all. And iOS 26 is another strange one. Like, this is in beta and that's fair enough. The idea of these developer builds is so that they can try out new things, features, looks, designs, see how people react to them and give honest feedback and then make changes. That's how these things work. They are not the final product. I totally get that. But we saw a radical design shift with liquid glass, something that has been almost divisive of the whole tech community. And Apple are already walking that decision back slightly, with the frosted glass approach instead of the liquid one. Almost like they hadn't fully thought that through with the readability concerns, the user experience implications of immense system-wide transparency. I'm not here to dunk on iOS 26, I like that it shakes things up and is something new, but it's almost like confirming my theory about Apple is kind of losing its spark or its polish in a way that I don't think it's really meaning to. iOS used to be the absolute pinnacle for readability, stability, but in recent years, and even on public builds, not iOS 26, it kind of has lost that edge with Android versions improving at such a high rate. I'd actually call Pixel experience the more complete experience, even in polish. Like, I've been using the iPhone 16 Pro Max since launch, and I used the 15 Pro Max before that. I'm not an Apple guy. This phone was actually provided to me by my employer, Android Police, so I use it for work, and therefore I have spent quite a bit of time with it. And there are things that I think are absolutely magnificent. But at the same time, I do feel like this versus a Pixel Pro XL or a Galaxy Ultra, it's not only far closer than you'd think, I actually think this falls behind those in some very, very meaningful ways. You guys know I'm a big fan of ProRes Log. Yes, it is different to most companies' implementations of Log, though I think Samsung is doing a fantastic job of that right now. Photographic styles are also really fun to play around with. Again, something that Samsung has been toying around with in its own camera app, and again, doing a great job of. But Apple's cameras tend to lack that substance or that weight for me, at least in their standard out-of-the-box modes. You can certainly get a lot more out of these sensors when you use RAW and you're able to edit more finely after the fact. Actually, one of my favorite photographers has made a big case for iPhone cameras and has captured some absolute bangers. So it's clearly possible with this hardware, it just might not be out of the box for everyone. You already know my feelings about the camera control button. It's pointless. I think it will be going away relatively soon. And actually, the battery life of this phone has been fantastic, considered it's not a humongous silicon carbon thing. It's a really easy all day, sometimes a 2-day, as long as you're not wearing a Garmin like I have. I find that, it impacts the battery life of basically any phone I'm using, so I try not to count it. I'm not a fan of the action button over the alert toggle. This is not a deal breaker for me, but again, I just think it was change for the sake of change. I don't know anyone who dislikes having the alert toggle, and I'm willing to bet most iPhone 16 Pro users just use that button like they would have used the toggle and don't really use it in its customized functions where you can add other shortcuts. I'm not calling this a bad phone, by the way. I'm sure millions that have bought it are still very happy with it, and Apple still makes some killer products like the base model M4 Mac Mini, AirPods Pros, and also the current MacBooks are ace. I totally get that you can't just put a new state-of-the-art cutting-edge hardware in every new model. Progress doesn't work like that. We can't break new barriers with every generation, given that every generation is an annual cycle now. But what we can do is at least be a bit more intentional and thoughtful about what changes we do make. And I truly believe that the iPhone 16 Pro Max was the cherry on top for proving to me that Apple is getting a bit lost. Apple has lost its edge, and I think that's something worth talking about. The once prestigious and esteemed brand feels more human now than it ever has done. I wonder if or when we'll see the company take steps to hold itself above everything else once again.